On May 5th, 1993, the peace of West Memphis, Arkansas was shattered. The town, known for its close-knit community and serene environment, was about to face an unimaginable horror. 3 8-year-old boys, Stevie Branch, Michael Moore, and Christopher Byers, went missing. Their disappearance sent waves of panic through the community as parents clutched their children tighter and neighbors began to fear the worst. Their bodies were found the next day in a drainage ditch in a wooded area known as Robin Hood Hills. The discovery was made by a search party, and the scene they stumbled upon was beyond their worst nightmares. The crime scene was horrific. The boys had been subjected to unimaginable brutality. The boys had been stripped naked and hogtied. Their small bodies were left in a state that spoke of a deep, disturbing violence. Their bodies bore signs of severe beating and other injuries. The medical examiner's report detailed the extent of the trauma, painting a grim picture of their final moments. The community was in shock and desperate for answers. Candlelight vigils were held and prayers were whispered in hopes of finding some semblance of peace. Fear gripped the town as rumors and speculation swirled. Whispers of dark rituals and satanic cults began to circulate, feeding the growing hysteria. The brutal nature of the crime sent shockwaves throughout the nation. Media outlets from across the country descended on West Memphis, turning the small town into a focal point of national attention. It was a crime that defied comprehension, a monstrous act that left an entire community reeling. Memorials and tributes sprang up as people struggled to come to terms with the horror that had invaded their lives. The small town, known for its tranquil atmosphere, was suddenly thrust into the national spotlight, its name forever linked to this unspeakable tragedy. The sense of safety and normalcy was shattered, replaced by a lingering fear and uncertainty. The pressure mounted on law enforcement to find the perpetrator and bring them to justice. The community demanded answers, and the police were under intense scrutiny to deliver results. However, the investigation took a turn towards the controversial. As days turned into weeks, the urgency to solve the case led to questionable decisions. The focus shifted from finding the real killer to securing a conviction, even if it meant pinning the crime on unlikely suspects. The pressure to close the case overshadowed the pursuit of true justice. The investigation zeroed in on 3 teenagers, Damien Echols, Jason Baldwin, and Jesse Miscali Jr., who were outsiders, drawn to heavy metal music and often misunderstood in their conservative community. Their unconventional lifestyles made them easy targets in a town desperate for answers, leading to a trial that would become infamous for its controversy and perceived injustice. The investigation into the murders of the 3 8-year-old boys quickly focused on a group of teenagers who were different, who stood out in the conservative town of West Memphis. These teenagers, with their unconventional appearances and interests, were easy targets for a community desperate for answers. Damien Echols, Jason Baldwin, and Jesse Miscali Jr. became the prime suspects. Their names and faces were soon plastered across media outlets, painting them as the culprits before any substantial evidence was presented. Echols, with his interest in occultism and heavy metal music, was an easy target. His fascination with the darker aspects of culture made him a convenient villain in the eyes of the public and law enforcement. He was labeled a devil worshipper, his taste in music and clothing misconstrued as evidence of a dark and sinister nature. The community's fear of the unknown and the different fueled these accusations, turning Echols into a symbol of evil. The police saw in these teenagers, particularly in Echols, convenient scapegoats. They were eager to close the case and present a sense of safety to the frightened community, even if it meant overlooking the truth. Their love for heavy metal music, their dark clothing, and their interest in the occult were seen as signs of their guilt. These superficial traits were enough to convince many that they were capable of such heinous acts. The community, gripped by fear and grief, readily accepted this narrative. The loss of 3 innocent children had left them in a state of shock, and they were desperate for someone to blame, someone to hold accountable. The investigation, instead of focusing on facts and evidence, became a witch hunt, fueled by prejudice and a need to find someone, anyone, to blame. The pressure to solve the case quickly led to a tunnel vision that ignored other potential leads. Baldwin and Miscali, while less ostracized than Echols, were also painted as his followers, drawn into his supposed web of evil. Their association with Echols and their own struggles to fit in made them easy targets as well. Their friendship with Eccles, their shared love for heavy metal music, and their struggles to fit in were all used against them, painting a picture of a dangerous group capable of unspeakable acts. The narrative constructed by the authorities and the media was compelling, but it was built on shaky ground. The investigation, clouded by judgment and a thirst for a quick resolution, failed to consider other possibilities, ignoring crucial evidence that could have led them down a different path. This rush to judgment had lasting consequences not just for the accused, but for the entire community, which was left with lingering doubts and unanswered questions.
The case against the West Memphis Three was built on shaky ground, lacking any physical evidence linking them to the crime scene. The prosecution's case relied heavily on the confession of Jesse Miskelly Jr., who had a low IQ and was interrogated for hours without a lawyer present. Under duress, he confessed to witnessing the murders and implicated Eccles and Baldwin. However, his confession was riddled with inconsistencies and details that did not match the crime scene.
Later, I recanted my confession, claiming it was coerced. I maintained my innocence throughout the trials, but the damage was done. My confession, despite its flaws and inconsistencies, had already swayed public opinion, painting me, Eccles, and Baldwin as guilty in the eyes of many.
The lack of physical evidence connecting the three teenagers to the crime scene was glaring. No DNA, fingerprints, or fibers matching the victims were found on their belongings or in their homes. The prosecution relied heavily on circumstantial evidence, much of which was based on stereotypes and assumptions about their interest in heavy metal music and the occult. The investigation, instead of being a meticulous search for truth, seemed more focused on building a narrative that fit their preconceived notions about the teenagers. Section 4. Trials and Tribulations, a Community Divided. The trials of the West Memphis Three were highly publicized events that captivated the nation and divided the community. The prosecution presented a case that relied heavily on Miskelly's confession and circumstantial evidence, painting the teenagers as devil worshippers who committed a satanic, ritualistic murder. The defense argued that the investigation was flawed, the confession coerced, and the lack of physical evidence pointed to their innocence. The trials exposed the deep divisions within the community of West Memphis. Some residents, swayed by the prosecution's arguments and fueled by fear and prejudice, believed in the teenagers' guilt. Others saw through what they perceived as a biased investigation and a lack of concrete evidence, rallying support for the accused. The first trial of Damien Eccles, the supposed ringleader, resulted in a guilty verdict and a death sentence. The subsequent trials of Baldwin and Miskelly also ended in convictions. Baldwin received a life sentence, while Miskelly, tried as a minor, was sentenced to life in prison plus 40 years. The verdicts sent shockwaves through the community and beyond, with many questioning the fairness of the trials and the validity of the convictions. Section 5. Echoes of injustice, doubts linger. Despite the convictions, doubts about the guilt of the West Memphis Three continued to linger. Many people believed that the teenagers were victims of a flawed justice system targeted because of their appearance and interests rather than any actual evidence. The lack of physical evidence, the reliance on a coerced confession, and the prosecution's focus on satanic panic themes raised serious concerns about the fairness of the trials.
As years passed, support for the West Memphis Three grew. Documentaries, books, and articles explored the case in detail, highlighting the inconsistencies and potential misconduct in the investigation. Celebrities, musicians, and human rights activists joined the cause, lending their voices to the growing chorus demanding justice for the imprisoned men.
The case became a symbol of the flaws in the criminal justice system, highlighting the dangers of tunnel vision, coerced confessions, and the influence of public opinion on juries. The West Memphis Three were not just names on a case file, they were individuals whose lives had been irrevocably altered, their futures stolen by a system that seemed more concerned with securing a conviction than uncovering the truth.
Section 6. A Glimmer of Hope, the fight for DNA testing, the fight for the West Memphis Three's freedom gained significant momentum in the late 1990s and early 2000s. Public awareness grew, and the case began to attract widespread attention from both the media and the general public. New forensic technologies, particularly DNA testing, offered a glimmer of hope. These advancements in science provided new methods to analyze evidence that had previously been considered conclusive. The defense team, along with new legal representatives and a growing team of supporters, fought tirelessly for access to DNA testing of evidence from the crime scene. They believed that these tests could reveal crucial information that had been overlooked or was previously unattainable. They believed that modern science held the key to proving the innocence of Eccles, Baldwin, and Miss Skelly. The potential to uncover new evidence through DNA testing was seen as a beacon of hope in their quest for justice.
The prosecution, however, resisted these efforts, arguing that the existing evidence was sufficient to uphold the convictions. They contended that the case had already been thoroughly examined and that the convictions were based on solid evidence. They maintained that the DNA testing would not yield any new information and would only serve to delay justice for the victims and their families. The emotional toll on the victims' families was a significant factor in their resistance. The battle over DNA testing became a focal point in the case, highlighting the potential of forensic science to either solidify convictions or expose wrongful imprisonment. This debate underscored the evolving nature of forensic science and its impact on the legal system. The defense argued that the absence of the defendant's DNA at the crime scene, coupled with the possibility of finding DNA evidence belonging to the real perpetrator, could not be ignored. They emphasized that this new evidence could potentially exonerate the accused and identify the true culprit. The fight for DNA testing became a race against time, a desperate attempt to utilize scientific advancements to correct a potential miscarriage of justice. The urgency of the situation was palpable, as every moment counted in their pursuit of the truth.